Just take a seat. Thank you. And thank you, guys. So everyone over here has had a trial or will have a trial, or if you're one of the lucky younger ones, maybe not yet experienced a trial. But Jesus has said in John 16:33, in this world we will have trouble, so that's a guarantee. But we need to have faith in him because he has overcome the world. But even knowing this as Christians, how do we respond when we suddenly get some bad news or, we're faced with a situation? Do we immediately turn to our Bible and do we go, let's see how, people have responded to it in there and I'm going to do exactly that? Or it's more of a shock and you're scared and you're afraid and you don't know what to do. It feels like your world might be crumbling as well. Well, we're not the only ones. Peter as well, when, he asked for it though, and he stepped out into that stormy water and that stormy sea. But even he suddenly got scared by looking around and he started sinking. But it's only when he could focus on Jesus when he was able to keep going and walking on that water and that the noise around him didn't matter. Well, I wasn't too much different. Back in 2022, for most part, that year was pretty good for me, except for COVID, of course. I think most of us got COVID back then. But towards the end of that year, things started changing. Now, up until then, I was really career-focused, driven. I was on track for another promotion, or so I hoped. And I was just really busy, and I just felt like I had all the balls up in the air, and everything was going swimmingly. Now, the kids and the husband might say, maybe not, because I wasn't giving them enough attention, and I, wasn't really helping as much as I should in that aspect. But for me, I thought it was going great. But come about October, I started getting this earache. And then that slowly progressed to neck stiffness and headaches. And I wasn't quite sure what was going on. And so I went to the GP and did all these array of tests. And by the end, we ended up doing a scan of my brain. And now I only got this report just before Christmas. So it took a couple of months, as these things take. And unfortunately, the scan, which I have a picture of, showed that there was a block in my aqueduct. So if you can see that, that's the scan, and that's the arrow pointing to the aqueduct about where the block is. Now, what happened was, as a result of that block, also they thought there was fluid being built up in my head and in my brain. And what the issue with that is that it can cause a whole heap of other issues. If it starts putting pressure on your brain, you can go blind, you can go deaf, you can, a whole heap of other stuff can happen. And so that was a major concern. And with shutdown happening, the GP was like, get into ED immediately. Now, as an example of how focused I was on work, I was actually working that evening, that day. It was a Friday. It was close to Christmas, I think a day or two before Christmas. And I was just telling Ivan, no, I just need to finish this at work and then I'm going to go to ED. So that's how focused I was with my work, right? And so Ivan's like, nope, we're going to ED now. And so we did that. And luckily, by God's grace, so I got assessed. It happened to be the same day that Pastor John went in for his heart attack. So that was pretty amazing too. But I got assessed in ED, and by God's grace, it wasn't critical. And so they were like, that's okay, you can wait till the neurosurgery department opens in January, and you can come back. But patience is not my virtue. So as most of us normally do, the first thing we go to, Google. Yeah, Google. So even if you Google, like, you got a cold, it comes up with pneumonia or you're going to die or something like that. So imagine when you put something like the brain thing on there and what you're going to get, right? But funnily enough, it didn't actually scare me, but it just meant like, okay, that's all right. God's kind of got me, Yes, other things around scared me, Now what am I going to do with my career? I know. I have my priorities a bit lopsided. Death, career, which one's more important? But yeah, I was more afraid of, things like that. Like all these things have built, what's going to happen with them rather than, dying. Because I know at the end, I'm going to go to God. I'm going to go with Jesus because that's his promise, right? During that time, we also consulted a neurosurgeon in India and a friend because we couldn't get answers here fast enough. And they did say, you'd probably need brain surgery. They need to put a shunt in to drain it and all of these sort of things. Anyway, what happened though is, like I was saying, my faith is in God, and I have been through trials before. And each time I've been through a trial, I've come out the other side. And it hasn't always been like that though. I haven't always had that focus on God and Jesus, and that's when I've floundered. And so I had to go back to my basics. I had to go back and have that focus on God. And it sounds like it's easier. It might sound like it's easier than it actually is, but there's a peace that comes upon you when you have your focus on God and when you have your focus on Jesus. There's so much of chaos and other things, and things can be falling down around you, but you just have this assurance that God's got things and God's got you, and He's in control. And so you don't have to stress about it, or it doesn't have to actually impact you. In James 1:2-4, it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." So in a weird way, I started changing that narrative, and I was like, instead of worrying about my situation, and I need to keep focusing on God, but you know what? I want to see how God uses this. I want to see what happens from here. What's the next thing? This is only a small part of it. I know He has to have a plan for this, and there's something good going to come out of this. Meanwhile, I have a lot of ongoing struggles. Things have started getting worse with my health. The neck stiffness, the headaches, there was nausea, there was absolute exhaustion beyond you could even imagine. I could barely finish small tasks, and I needed to nap, I needed to lie down. And that put a lot of load on Ivan, on Jaden, and luckily my mother-in-law was around at the time, and for her too. So I did have quite a bit of support network, but they were feeling pressurized too with all of that. And then the other thing was that brain surgery, that looming thought of, I'm going to need brain surgery. But before we went down there, and because I was not critical, they thought they wanted to do another brain test, but it's an invasive test where they actually drill a hole in your head, and they put a probe in to measure the pressure of fluid on there. Now, we prayed about it, and neither Ivan nor I felt peace about going in and doing that test, even though the doctors assured us it was routine. And so we said no. We went to Sydney, we saw, got second opinions, we saw ENTs, we saw optometrists, we saw dentists, just to rule out anything else that could possibly causing, the issues. But in all that, I was really, really exhausted through all of that. We even looked for an alternative treatment in India, where a friend of ours who had similar experiences had really good outcomes. We looked to go there, and they did massages, and they did diets, and they did exercises, whole thing. They just took care of you. But when I sent my reports to them, they came back and said, "Sorry, we can't help you." That was not reassuring, to say the least. But all this is still happening. I've reduced my work hours. I'm working more from home so that I can get some naps in the day in and, just have my energy up. And Pastor John asked if I could serve on the church board as a secretary, and if I could preach last May for Mother's Day. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can barely stay awake. My memory issues are also bad. I can't remember specifics. How am I going to, write these things down? How am I going to remember anything and speak up there? But you know what? I said yes. I know. I said yes, and I prayed. And we prayed and prayed and prayed, and scriptures and words came to me from the Bibles, and I got encouragement from things that I was reading. For example, when Paul asked God to remove the thorn in his side in 2 Corinthians 12:9, God says, you know what? My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And I even thought about Moses when he was asked to go and speak on behalf of his people, and he was so nervous because he stuttered, that's the word. And he was, falling all over, but God said, you know what, I will strengthen you and I will equip you for what all you need. And he gave him a helper and things like that. And I also had friends praying for me. I also had Connect Group pray for me and the prayer group pray for me. And so I was emboldened. And I volunteered I even then next volunteered to help out for Revival Week. And all this time, my headaches are increasing, the nausea is getting worse, the neck pain's not going anywhere. But now, spoiler alert, this is where the miracle actually happens. So it was Revival Week, right? And I was really struggling, but I pushed through. I pushed through each day, coming in for prayer and for worship. And on that Thursday, it was Pastor Esther Greenwood that was preaching. And I was so bad that I actually asked Ivan to take over volunteering for me because my head was just pounding. But I still came up the front and I still worship. And Pastor Esther then called out for somebody who had a headache and needed prayer. And I did see Sharon getting excited at that when she announced that. But I wasn't there yet. I was like, headaches, that's so generic. Everybody gets headaches. That's not me. But then she went a step further and she said, there's somebody who's got a neck pain as well and this neck stiffness and it's been there for a while. And that's when I knew it was me. And I have to say, everybody needs friends like the friends in the Bible that took their friend who was sick and lowered them to Jesus, because there were so many of you guys around me going, yeah, it's her. And I could barely get my hand up in time before everybody was doing that. And so Pastor Esther came over and she prayed for me. And instantly my neck pain went. It was just gone. It was like free, and it just felt like a whole lift going, but it gets better. It gets better. Even though my headache didn't go though. Headache did not go just yet. The next day, Pastor John anointed me with oil and he prayed for me. And from then, I felt that headache slowly subside until Monday. I didn't need a nap. I worked a whole day. I didn't need a nap. And Ivan was really excited about this part. I got dinner. I cooked dinner. I washed up. I packed up. And I was so excited. And without a nap the whole day. And so by then I knew, and this is it was so unusual. It had been 6 months of struggles before that, not being able to do any of that. And then suddenly to be able to do it, I was just so thankful and so grateful. It was amazing. And now I knew I had healing, but I had a scan already booked in for the week after to check and see what was going on. And so I was like, God, I want to be able to share this testimony. I want to be able to show people what's going on, not that it's just in my head. And so I did. I went in for my scan, and although the scan kind of said the fluid was still there, what it did say was this. So it said, for translation purposes, that the cerebral aqueduct where the block is, it appears normal. There was no block. And so that is just, give God a hand. He's amazing. That was just phenomenal. Yep, indeed. So for me, it's still an ongoing journey. I believe that when the time is right, God will give me the full healing. And if he doesn't, it doesn't matter, because God's good. It's about him. It's not about me. And I know he'll give me whatever I need whenever I do need it. Because God's grace is sufficient for us. And that's it. All I need to do is stay focused on him and stay steadfast. Even you waver a little bit, that's totally human, that's totally normal, but we need to refocus and stay steadfast on him. Because there's no triumph without a trial, and there's no testimony without a test. Now, I want to encourage everybody over here. You may be going through situations, you may be falling apart, and it may be things you can't gather and you can't grasp and you can't understand. You can't look beyond those bugs that Janine was talking about. But in Colossians 1:17 it says, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So stay rooted in him. And I would encourage you, keep praising him, waiting on him, and trust him even through the process. Don't wait for that end outcome, because he is good and he deserves it. Thank you.
Morning, church. Last year, some of you might remember Pastor Hamish preached a message on what do these stones mean to you. I I think it was last year, but he'll tell me if it wasn't. The message was based on the account of when God brought Israel across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. And then when they crossed over, God said, take 12 stones, build a memorial so that in the future, if your children ask, what do these stones mean, you can tell them what God has done. And I remember listening to that message and thinking, I've got 18 stones from a trip that I made with my sister, Gay, to Malaysia about 8 years ago. And this is a testimony of those 18 stones and what God did for me. But I need to give you some background. So I grew up in Malaysia in an area called Cameron Highlands. It's up in the mountains. It's about 6 hours from Kuala Lumpur, or KL if you're local. It's a rural place with little townships and villages, and most of the people there were vegetable farmers. My parents worked in the government clinic there. My dad was a hospital assistant. My mum was a midwife. And when they arrived, just after the Second World War, there were a few Christian farmers there, but there was no Protestant Christian presence in that area. So after a while, my parents decided we'll hold Sunday services in our home, which was above the clinic. So on that first Sunday, there were 6 people. There were my parents, a friend of theirs called Walter Phillips, and my 3 older sisters. So I wasn't there because I wasn't born yet, okay? I'm not that old. After a while, the Christian farmers started to attend church, and that was how the church began up there. So fast forward, June 2016, my sister Geg and I went back to Malaysia to attend the 70th anniversary celebration of that church. It was such a special time. You know, it's just seeing what God has done in the church and is still continuing to do. That's a testimony for another time. But the next day, my sister Geg began to feel unwell with what we thought was a bad case of food poisoning. And a friend of ours had driven us up to Cameron Highlands and was driving us back. And that trip was really difficult because she progressively got worse as we were driving back to the apartment. And that evening we decided, look, I think it might be better for us to call an ambulance to take her to the hospital, which we did. And when the ambulance arrived, they checked on her and they said she'd passed away. My first thought, no, this is not supposed to happen. We were on holidays, we still had plans for the remaining time in KL. Then we were going to Singapore for a few days before coming home. So how is it possible to go from Geg being unwell and me losing my sister in the space of 12 hours? And then I had this million thoughts going through my mind. What do I do now? How am I supposed to handle this? I'm in a foreign country. I hadn't lived there for more than 40 years. I don't know anybody there other than my cousins and a few friends. And I don't know what the processes are there in general, let alone for something like this. You know, I was, if I could wind back the clock, I would have. And then, you know, as if to highlight how helpless I felt, the paramedic actually came up and said, look, because Geg died at home, you're going to have to call the nearest police station and report it. And I thought, great. I don't even know where the nearest police station is, let alone how to call them. And right at that point, the neighbor, Eddie, came home and he saw what was going on and all the activity, and he came up and he, you know, just wanted to find out what was going on. And when we told him, he said, oh, don't worry about it. I'll call the police for you. And you know, it was a small thing, but it was a big thing for me because that was my light bulb moment. I knew that help was from God and that God had already positioned himself in the middle of what I was facing. So from that point on, for the next week, I kept seeing God's hand in everything that I had to deal with. Every time I needed help, there was an answer. I saw instances where God was already working before I knew I needed him to. And then there were instances of what I call a bonus display of God's goodness, where God did things for me that I didn't expect, I didn't ask for, but he did it anyway. Because you know what? That is the heart of our good God. So I came up with about 18 instances, specific instances where I saw God do things for me, hence my 18 stones. And of course, I won't have time to go through it all, but here are some main ones. The friend drove us up to KL and back. If not, we would have had to take public transport. I dare not imagine what it would be like when Gabe was so sick to be on public transport. See, for me, that was God looking after me before I knew I needed help. I mentioned we were going to Singapore on the way back. If it had happened a few days later, I would have been in Singapore with Gabe alone in a hotel room. I wouldn't have had the support I was getting from my cousins in KL. God is so good. He knew, he was already doing stuff. I mentioned Eddie. Well, later on in that evening, I sort of realized I really needed to contact a funeral home. Great. It was almost midnight. I didn't know anyone. How do I contact anyone? See, God provided an answer there because the police officer who came said, I know someone, I'll call for you. And that's how we got introduced to the funeral director, a Chinese man with not so Chinese name called Desmond. Desmond couldn't speak a word of English. My Chinese is like from poor to not quite, but almost non-existent. So we had a great time, making funeral arrangements. But, by God's grace, we did it. And, all those processes about the situation that I didn't know and I was concerned about how I was going to handle that. Well, Desmond knew. He took care of everything. He took care of liaising with the Australian High Commission, doing all the paperwork, all the arrangements so we could bring back Gake's ashes back to Australia. I think I only had 2 phone calls with the Australian High Commission over that time. Desmond did it all. God's goodness. The next question we had was where were we going to have the funeral? God gave us an answer when my cousins said their church said we could use their premises. But it wasn't just using their premises. The church did so much. They set up the room, they did the sound, they assigned Pastor Malcolm to help us with anything we needed. And because I didn't know, places and things and where you'd get certain things done, every time I had a question, the answer from the church was generally, we'll do that for you. So for example, where can we go to print the order of service for the funeral? They printed it for us. Who can we contact to arrange refreshments for after the funeral? They arranged that for us. See, that was God's goodness displayed through the church. But then on top of everything that they did for us, they offered our family the use of their hospitality. They called it their hospitality house, which was a property within walking distance of the church. They use it for visiting ministries. They said, it's free. Why don't you guys come and stay there overnight before the funeral? That meant we didn't have to battle the KL mad traffic to get to the funeral. So being able to stay there was unexpected, but to me that was one of God's bonus blessings. Here's another one. A day after it all happened, I decided I really should call the hotel in Singapore to let them know that we won't be turning up and why. I wasn't expecting anything. It was just a courtesy call to say we won't be there. And the The hotel actually said, sorry, can't help you because you didn't book directly through us. You booked through a booking site. So if you don't turn up, pretty much didn't say it in these words, but if you don't turn up, we're going to have to charge you. And I thought, it's okay, I'll lose $350. I've got too much on my plate right now. A few days later, the hotel actually contacted me and said, we rang the booking site for you. If you send the death certificate, we'll take care of things and we won't charge you. Now, a hotel that says, do this, a hotel that does the work for you so they won't have to charge you. That's a bonus display of God's goodness. No, I don't have time to go on to more, but these are just samples. But when I was preparing this, God reminded me that I actually have 19 stones, not 18. Sim can't count. God didn't say that, I did, okay? But I want to share with you the 19th stone. So after a week after I got back to Canberra, I was meeting with some friends, and I was just sharing with them what God had done for me on that trip. And one of my friends, Francis Lowe, had a word for me. So let me read this word to you. Isaiah 57:1 says, good people pass away. The godly often die before their time, but no one seems to care or wonder why. No one seems to understand that God is protecting them from the evil to come. The word continues. Francis said, when I heard about her death during the 70th anniversary celebration, sudden, unexpected, and very tragic, I knew it was ordained of God. I believe your parents in heaven were permitted to see the proceedings which took place in Cameron Highlands. Tonight, I heard the Lord say to me, your parents requested for Gabe to join them, to spare her from more pain on earth. Your parents were part of the cloud of witnesses of Hebrews 12:1, who saw the proceedings, but now Gabe is part of that cloud of witnesses. So Hebrews 12:1 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. I want to finish by sharing my life lessons from this experience. And the first is this. Look for God's goodness in every situation. We talk about God being always good, and that's true. But if I really believe that, then His goodness is in every situation I face. Whether it's a situation that is difficult or not what I expect or not one that I necessarily choose to be in. But look for His goodness not because He hides His goodness, but because we can get so easily caught up with dealing with the circumstances that we can't see His goodness. So it's always there. Just look for it. The second is this. Seeing God's goodness does not change the circumstances or the reality of those circumstances. But it changes how we see them. It changes how we see God. And it changes us. That's been my experience. So 8 years ago, I went to Malaysia with my sister, and she suddenly and tragically died. But I look back at that time and say, I cannot look back to that time and not see that that was also when I tangibly experienced the goodness of God like never before. So Psalm 34 verse 8 invites us to taste and see that the Lord is good. My testimony is that in June 2016, through one of the most difficult experiences of my life, I tasted and I saw that the Lord is good.